Double Primer is back-to-back conversations with someone passionate about their work and passionate about someone else's work. Mostly art and mostly Atlanta. I'm your host, Sean Mills.
So, are you familiar with Michael Bolton at all? Have you heard any of his music?
Familiar with him kind of as the butt of jokes, as kind of a 80s crooner that I guess later had a resurgence in a Lonely Island video.
Like, during the 90s, he debuted as, like, a heavy metal artist.
Oh.
And there's, like, a music video still online, like, called Everybody's Crazy. And I guess, like, the overlap there makes sense from the industry that, like, he has a good voice, so this is what's popular, so we'll use him for this.
John Mayer, you kind of think of him as this kind of light cafe music or like loved by tweens or something. But he's really a pretty incredible guitarist. And like I saw him playing with Herbie Hancock and he kind of was lighting up the stage. So
yeah. Well, welcome to Double Primer, episode 36. I'm your host, Sean, with a special guest, Alex Bailey, this week. Alex Bailey is a guy I've known for years now, and when I met him, he was a writer. He was even a movie maker with Calzones Blancos, and he's going to be sharing his kind of unique perspective. So, Alex, what's trending in your world?
Well, I recently started law school, and I'm trying to work through that, and then as I have, the little time that I have to spend to myself, I have been relaxing with watching a Japanese reality TV show called Terrace House.
And how did you find Terrace House? Like, was it word of mouth or?
Well, so Terrace House, there were a few seasons on Japanese television, and then it actually got picked up by Netflix when they released in Japan. And I'm in a long-distance relationship right now, and one of the ways that I connect with my significant other is by watching Terrace House online, via chat together.
Is that just, like, do you have an appointment you guys do that, or?
Usually it just kind of happens organically. I guess we try to Skype just about every day or every other day, and when we have time, we'll, decide to watch an episode of Terrace House or something. It's kind of funny where she's in Boston and I'm in Lexington, Virginia, and we're several hundred miles apart, but we still fall into the regular, romantic routine of spending way too long to decide on what we want to watch. So we'll look at a list of, every movie on Netflix, and, we can't decide exactly what we want to watch. So we'll often just end up watching another episode of Terrace House or whatever show we're working on.
Mm-hmm. And what's kind of interesting about Terrace House to me is that, and I think this is maybe what it's famous for, is that it's a reality show, but it's a different kind of pace. So, one of the first kind of reality shows for TV in America was Real World on MTV, and part and parcel of that was like that they wanted to try to heighten the drama as much as possible, but Terrace House kind of has like a slower slice of life kind of aspect, right?
Right. I think it's kind of more indicative of a Japanese mentality, I think. But, what appeals to me is that it's refreshing instead of, the American style of reality TV where it's kind of hyper reality and everything is elevated, everything is dramatic, and these people just make ridiculous decisions in their life. The decisions and choices people make on Terrace House, although sometimes are maybe not the decision I would make, but they're a decision that a reasonable person might make in their life. So, there's a lot of romances on the show, but then also people are on the show to further their career or figure out kind of what the next step is for their life.
Like, in my life, my sister tells me about episodes she's watching at the gym, or my mom will even, like, tell me, like, oh, this happened on Terrace House, and I think part of it, too, is, like, the gossip aspect, that you get to kind of like gossip about people's lives, and you have like a shared community. So even if you don't, and it works especially well for like you and your girlfriend who are not physically together, it's that like you can share gossip as like a ritual.
Right, that's exactly right. One of the things for me that separates it from American reality shows is that a good portion of the show is actually there's a group of Japanese celebrities, and it will zoom to them, and they will kind of talk for 5 minutes or so and decompress what just happened on the show. Analyzing, oh, these two characters just went on a date. I think that she was thinking this, but he was thinking this, and it's really an interesting way it really invites the watcher to kind of apply that type of analysis towards what the characters are doing. And in my situation, it works out really well because, it's not just my girlfriend and I watching a show passively together. We pause every couple minutes and talk about, oh, I think, that character completely misrepresented what he wanted from that date, or something like that.
Right. And also there's a kind of meta-narrative where like the people in the house have their lives outside the house. So I think one of the special things about Terrace House in the Japanese version was that it was airing while they were still in the house, and like a hairdresser might run into a viewer or something like that. And then for this now American one, like one of the characters in the show has gone on to like become an actress in addition to like her reality role. Like she's kind of using it as a springboard. So this character, Lauren Tsai, is going to be on the next season of Legion, a show on FX.
Oh, right. Yeah, I guess to back up a little, there's been different iterations of Terrace House. There's been Boys and Girls in the City, Aloha State, and then the most recent one is Opening New Doors. But Aloha State happened in Hawaii, and it had a lot of Hawaiian people or half Japanese, half American people to kind of reach out to the American audience with the release of Terrace House on Netflix. And Lauren Tsai was one of those people. She was a native Hawaiian, and actually she had studied abroad in Japan, but then was mastering Japanese as she was on the show. So in some of the early episodes, you can kind of tell that her Japanese isn't perfect, but she's really working on it. But then now she's kind of used the show as a springboard to kind of become this bigger star, and is now, as Sean said, about to start as an actress on the new Marvel show. And
I think that's kind of a good transition, because part of what makes your perspective so unique is that you worked as both a teacher in Korea and in Japan, teaching English. So do you want to talk a little bit about how like that informs your perspective or your experiences?
Yeah, well, I think that I guess I will say I started watching this show with my girlfriend, and we met teaching English in Japan together. And she is American, but of Japanese descent. And so watching the show, we kind of started watching because we both really missed our time in Japan now that we're back in the States. And it kind of gave us a window into Japanese life. And it's also really interesting because there's sort of like cultural norms or kind of stereotypes of people in Japan that are slightly different than in America. Like the concept of like a bro or, like a party girl. Those things are a little different, and there's different things that go with those kind of archetypes. And my girlfriend, being American but having grown up around Japanese culture, she's very astute at pointing out these things that I completely miss as the dumb American.
I think there's a kind of interesting shared culture where, anyone in North America shares like Hollywood, but, in Asia, like there's the culture of like manga and manhwa and like the dramas, and like that's like a common ground. I'm wondering,
Right.
having lived in both Korea and Japan, like what did you find like as a common ground, and what did you find as like kind of was different between the two?
Celebrity is kind of treated differently in Japan in a lot of ways. I guess to be honest, when I was in Korea, I didn't own a TV or watch that much Korean television, but I got more into it when I was living in Japan. But as I was saying, the celebrity is kind of treated differently. Like there's kind of a threshold status at which you become a celebrity, and then you kind of run the circuit of all these variety shows, and it doesn't matter if you're a model or actor or singer, you'll appear on these different kind of shows as a celebrity. Similar to like Jimmy Fallon or the Tonight Show or the carpool karaoke, where those things are kind of more starting up now, but it's a little more formalized in Japan, I think. And I guess the group of celebrities that watch Terrace House with you, they also appear on several other shows and are well-known celebrities for other reasons beyond Terrace House.
For you, out of college, you did something like pretty unusual, I feel like that you went to foreign countries in Asia where you didn't speak the language at all. So like, what was the inspiration for that?
Well, I guess to go way back into my history, basically I graduated from university about right at the time that the big recession was hitting the States. And graduated with an English degree, was having problems finding a job, and then I'd been hopping from various job to various job, just a lot of odd jobs. And then I decided that I'd really like to go see more of the world. I didn't have anything like a stable career or family keeping me in the States, no wife or kids or anything. So I decided that I would look for a job teaching abroad. And I first signed up to go to Korea. And I found a recruiter online and worked with her. And basically it took me several months to get my visa and several other kind of forms, passport, all settled. And then once that was figured out, I was on a plane to Korea in about 2 weeks. And I was teaching at an after-school academy in Korea. And I did that for a year. And while I was in Korea, once I'd finished my contract, I went and visited Japan for about a week. And I had such great time in Japan that I decided I really wanted to go back. And so I came back to the United States for about 8 months or so. And during that time, I applied for what's called the JET program, the Japan English Teaching Program. And it's a long process to sign up for. You've got to interview, write an essay. And then I was accepted and ended up in Japan. And so something interesting about my time in Japan is that the program, the JET program, is it's actually through a joint venture by the Japanese government and various other English-speaking countries. And so they choose where you go. And so you sign up, and then they place you at a school in Japan. And so I signed up, was ready to go to Japan, and I got my placement back, and it was Tokyo. And, I was really excited about the big city, getting ready for life in Tokyo. And then about 3 weeks before I went to Japan, I got an email that was saying that my school was placed in Tokyo School District on Miyake Island, which is actually a tiny volcanic island about 6 hours from Tokyo by boat. So I kind of had to make a decision of going to this tiny island when I thought I was going to Tokyo, and I decided to do it, and it worked out, and it was great.
Like you had a system working with you to get your visas and stuff, because that can be pretty difficult, right? Like if you're trying to do it by yourself, like did they kind of hold your hand through like any sort of governmental stuff, and it was just a matter of like you submit your paperwork and someone else does it for you, or did you still have issues where you had to like deal with embassies or something?
Right. So when I went to Korea, I went through a private recruiter. And so I had to do a lot of the visa application by myself. I had to go to the Korean embassy and talk to people there and, send a number of documents to Korea and back and forth, and get lots of, certifications on my documents from like notaries and that kind of stuff. And then when I went to Japan, the JET program, basically they held my hand through the whole process. They've sent thousands of English teachers to Japan. And actually, as I said, it's through the Japanese government, and in preparation for the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, they've actually ramped up the program and put about 5 years ago, there were only 3 or 4 language teachers in Tokyo through the JET program, and they were mostly on the small islands like I was. But then the year that I started on JET, they had put a native English speaker as a language teacher in every high school in Tokyo. And I was involved in that is why I ended up in the Tokyo School District.
In a personal way, like, what do you feel like you took from it that, like, you brought with you? Or was it just sort of like...
I know it sounds hugely cliche, and, going to Asia on this lavish vacation to find yourself or something. And I feel like, I still don't fully know that I've found myself, but I think that going somewhere where you basically know nobody and you have to start a life for yourself, I think it's really a learning experience how to deal with new situations, but also you learn a lot about yourself in a situation like that, especially in my situation, because I was on the island. I spent 1 year on the island, Miyake-jima, and then 1 year in actual Tokyo proper. But the year on the island, there's about a population of 2,500 people on the island. And of those, maybe 3 people spoke, decent enough English that I could carry on a conversation. And so a majority of the time on the island, I was having to figure out ways to entertain myself, figure out ways to try to talk to people with my very poor Japanese. And so that was a big learning experience for me.
You're now in law school, and how, like, you don't have any ability to call on saying, like, well, I was a Korean teacher, so you should respect my opinion on this case, right? That it seems like so divorced.
Right.
Did anything transfer over on your side?
I think that there is a lot of crossover in as much as you just have to really learn to adapt to new situations. And I guess as I've explained in kind of the past several years of my life, I've kind of started over and tried to remake myself several times in different ways. And I think that for me, law school was a big part of a kind of a response to that. I'd kind of been changing what I was doing every other year or so, doing something different. And I kind of got to a point where I'd seen a lot of different things, and I really want some stability in my life. And I think law school was it's kind of the stereotypical responsible, stable career. And so that was one of the big draws for me, is hopefully finding some stability through law school. And hopefully my time spent abroad will help me to become a better law student and lawyer.
You say you were straight out of school, you were pre-law in undergrad, and you went right into law school. You might not be as good a lawyer potentially as you are going to be now, because you have like a broader base of experience. Maybe you will be better at talking to clients, or even talking to anyone that's going to come across your path. Like, do you feel like you have that confidence, or is that still something you're not sure about yet?
I think I'm still working on that a little bit. But I'm coming into law school, and I'm several years older than most of the other law students here. And I would say that, ideally my kind of, wisdom of the world will give me some sort of benefit. But there's definitely several other students here that have kind of been on that fast track of straight out of high school into top university, straight out of university into law school. And, a lot of them, they are very good at school, but they kind of haven't experienced much outside of just kind of an academic setting. And I think that, eventually to become a good attorney or whatever profession, I think that it will benefit people to kind of get more experience with, the various other aspects of the world outside.
On the other hand, you are have a wide opportunity to be different kinds of lawyers, right? Like, there's as many different types of lawyers as there are types of people. Does that, are you already kind of thinking about how you would want to make your practice, or what types of law that you would or would not be interested in that respect?
Well, I'm still pretty undecided as far as the field of law that I want to enter. So I'm still working on that. I'm just a first year student. But I think it is interesting what you were saying about the, kind of the conceptions of lawyers. And, it's something that people often overlook, is that, for every kind of stereotypical, slicked back hair, shark lawyer that's out to get you and, on some tiny intricacy of a contract or something, for each lawyer like that, there would be a lawyer that would protect you against that type of lawyer. So there's obviously people on both sides of the law, those that are helping and those that are, looking out for maybe less than noble interests. But hopefully I will be one of the good lawyers.
You said that you are atypically a little bit older than most of your peers. So, has that created any sort of interesting or difficulties for you?
I would say one of the big things that I face daily is the fact that, there's these students that are about 8 or 10 years younger than me, but some of them are doing much better than me in class, or I might go to them for advice or something about an aspect of the law that I might not have understood, or, a certain case that was difficult. And it's kind of interesting to be in that situation where, we're all going through this together, but we're at different stages of our life age-wise, and kind of having to humble myself to ask someone much younger for advice is kind of a funny thing.
Law runs in your family, so like your brother and your father are also lawyers. Like, is that affecting you in any way? Like, is there pressure, or is there like relief that you have someone to ask questions about? Or
it is a sense of relief, but also pressure for sure. I would say my dad was a lawyer, and I've never felt like there was pressure for me to become a lawyer. If anything, I think that having people in the legal profession in my family for years kind of pushed me away from being interested in the profession. But then I don't know if it's just that, my father being a lawyer, he instilled values of law and order or something that made it an interest to me. I came to the decision to go to law school on my own. And I think there wasn't any pressure from my family on that. I will say, though, it's a little frustrating sometimes because my father went to law school, 40 years ago, but he was very successful in law school and a successful lawyer after that. So I think there's a little bit of pressure when I talk to my dad, I did this, I succeeded, I was very highly ranked in my class. I think you should too. So there is a little difficulty in that, but it's also nice to have somebody close to me that I can talk to and that can give me advice or help me understand something I might not understand.
Like if you want to be able to look up cases and you're not in law school, like it's pretty difficult for you, right? But like you in law school right now, you have access to like the full sum of like human experience, like that you can look up cases and like, have you indulged in that at all? Or is it just like basically reading a phone book, or like, have you had any like kind of interesting research experiences as a law student?
Right. Well, I'm as a first year student, I'm taking a legal research class, and it is really nice because we have free access to these kind of premium legal research softwares. I guess LexisNexis and Westlaw are the big ones, and then maybe Bloomberg is a pretty distant third as far as popularity. And, these are hugely influential softwares in the legal field. Like not too long ago, if you wanted to know something about a law, you'd have to go to the law library, find the right book, look it up. But with these databases, you can have access to any case in the history of American law, basically, at your fingertips. And then within them, any case that is referenced in any of those cases, you can then open that case. And this software it's freely available to law students. But, once you're a working lawyer, you have to pay really expensive amounts for these. Like, I think on the pricing is different. And so you wouldn't have access to these things unless you worked for a really big firm that had paid for them. Like, I think on Westlaw, you have to pay a couple dollars for every search you do. So I guess research efficiency is very important.
There's even this like quote unquote life hack where if there's like a scientific article published, they suggest you even email the actual writer for a copy rather than like having to go through the difficulty of paying through these sites to get access to stuff. So do you have any sort of opinion about like, do you wish it was more open source? Do you think like it's necessary because of reasons, or like is it just the way it is and you don't think too much about it? Or
I guess I would say that I think that, you know, knowledge should be more accessible to more people. You know, it's one of the many ways that it makes it more difficult from people of different economic backgrounds to get into the legal field, besides, you know, the exorbitant costs of school. And I guess textbooks are another thing, you know. The law school textbook industry is just a total racket where basically every year the law will be updated for various reasons. You know, various cases might change the legal precedents. And so a couple sentences might change in a law textbook from one year to the next year. And so you can't use the 2017 version of a textbook in 2018. So there's a very small, like, used market for legal textbooks. And they're also very expensive books, you know. Like law students every semester spend hundreds of dollars on textbooks. And I would say that right now that's kind of more of a problem I'm dealing with than, to me immediately, than having to deal with these pay sites for like Lexis or Westlaw. And I guess I wanted to take this opportunity just to talk about an interesting aspect of the Lexis Westlaw conundrum. But for me, it's beneficial that there's a lot of competition between the two, Westlaw and Nexus. And so it's almost like they're, you know, Camel cigarettes appealing to kids or something. There will be Lexis or Westlaw representatives coming by the school weekly and will distribute various things, you know, if giving highlighters or water bottles, kind of trying to get the law students hooked on using their software so that they'll want to use it once they're out of law school. They'll want to pay for it.
It's really interesting. So it's like similar to the pharmacology like industry, like that there are people like reps, pharmacy reps that like go around trying to get doctors hooked on prescribing a certain drug that they want you for life kind of thing.
Right, yeah, and they have various things where if you perform X amount of searches per week, you get Lexis points or something, and then you can later redeem the points you get for using that site to search. You can use the points to get like a Starbucks gift card or, you know, real world items. Like,
for you, is that like Kool-Aid points or Camel Cash? Like, do you have any like experiences in your life that relates to, or is this like new for you?
I think it's actually pretty new. I've you know, I think at one point I was collecting Coca-Cola points for something, but I forget what I don't think I ended up getting anything with those.
Yeah. Similar experience with the Coke points, like, and I guess like similarly they're like, well, if we get them young, we'll hook them for life. And I don't know what I signed up for, but at one point I got like a metal tin. Like, it must have cost so much to ship, and it had like this whole ad campaign that was like, if you don't know, you don't go, Coca-Cola, and it had like all these like little Coke items, and it worked in the sense that like, wow, this is cool, and like my sister was jealous, but the funny thing is it's like you can't not drink Coke, at least in the Atlanta area. Like, it's
right.
It's like a religion. Like, you'd be hard pressed to find a Pepsi if you wanted to.
It's kind of interesting that you're talking about the Coke and Pepsi points. And as you were saying before, there's a lot of, you know, cases or universal aspects of the first year law school experience. Like there's there's a lot of cases that every law student from Harvard Law School down to, Florida Panhandle University or whatever, there's cases that are precedent that people read in all of their first year classes. And one of the big contracts case is about Pepsi points. I don't know if you remember, but there was a Pepsi ad when they first introduced Pepsi points. And, you get 500 Pepsi points, you can get a Pepsi water bottle, or 1,000 Pepsi points and you can get a Pepsi t-shirt. But in the ad, it introduces this kid and, he puts on a shirt and it shows the amount of Pepsi points, Pepsi t-shirt, 1,000 points. He puts on like a cool leather jacket, Pepsi leather jacket, 50,000 points. Pepsi sunglasses, 20,000 points. And then eventually he shows up in his high school in a F-16 fighter, and it says like Pepsi F-16 fighter, 5 million Pepsi points. And on the premise that nobody could ever reach 5 million Pepsi points. But some guy accumulated 5 million Pepsi points and tried to redeem them for his Pepsi F-16 fighter, which was a joke and never existed. And so there was a big contracts case about the Pepsi points. And I think it came down to the fact that it was an obvious joke that you can buy this F-16 fighter. But a guy took it to court.
Well, is the judgment part of the story, or is it not that interesting?
Oh, well, yeah, I think the guy lost. He did not get his F-16 jet.
Well, did he lose, or did he get a good settlement? Was that part of it?
I believe he got nothing.
In science circles, the cliche story that is used so much in pop culture is the Schrodinger's cat. Have you heard that?
About the cat in the box.
Yeah.
People ever did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is there a Schrodinger's cat version of law school?
So there's a case called Paul's graph, and the long and short of the case is that a woman is standing in a train station and a man runs late to the train and hops on the moving train and is assisted by a station master. And as he hops on the train, he drops his parcel out of his hand, and the parcel is full of explosives which explode and injure the woman standing in the train station. And I guess this is a very famous torts case about, kind of how long is the extent of liability? If is the station master acting reasonably in assisting this guy to get on the train late? Or is there a reasonable expectation that, he would be holding an explosive that could hurt this woman? And I think that the exploding case was not in the extent of liability of what is expected of the station master. So I think the woman ends up losing that case.
It seems like oftentimes it's not necessarily the judgment that's important. You can just memorize that, but it's the arguments made to win or lose the judgment. Is that true, or is it all equally important?
It's always very important to not just understand who won, but maybe more so the reason that they won. Because somebody might win a case on certain reasoning that would make another plaintiff lose the case if it goes the other way.
When I was a honors poli-sci student, I think the simplified version was that law was mostly about a precedent being set and then just finding the right precedent in order to win. Is that a too simplistic viewpoint of the law?
Basically, if if the precedent helps you, you want to say, our case is like the precedent. It's very similar here. And then if the precedent does not help you, you want to try to say, oh, like that happened there, but our case is different because of this.
What do you use as an example to prove something is not like something?
When you're arguing that it's different than precedent, you might try to accentuate the small ways that it's different. For instance, recently in administrative law, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, there was a case recently where they tried to pass a rule about the tobacco industry. And, and by many standards, food or cigarettes are a drug, obviously. But in the wording of the way that they passed it, the Food and Drug Administration is their goal was to prevent harmful goods from entering the market, which would, as an inherently harmful good, a cigarette shouldn't be on the market at all. But they weren't ready to stop the entire tobacco industry that huge parts of the economy were based on, in certain areas. And so they decided that the cigarette industry is different and not held within what the FDA controls, even though it's a drug, because it's a inherently harmful item, not something that can be made safe.
Is there any sort of case, or is there any sort of law school experience that you haven't had a chance to share that that comes to mind that you'd like to?
There was one case that I just thought was kind of fun that we read in my property course recently, and the basic story of the case is that somebody, an out-of-town buyer, had bought this house, and upon making the contract to purchase the house, he realized or found that the house is in fact haunted. And so you have, these legal professionals, judges, are trying to figure out if a house being haunted is a condition of the house that the seller has to reveal to a buyer, if the contract is void because they failed to reveal that, or if a house being haunted is, this supernatural occurrence that there's no need to mention. But the judge that wrote the opinion of the case kind of went a little overboard on sass and used a lot of puns. The defendant doesn't have a ghost of a chance of winning this case, and I think that one, the buyer of the house ended up getting out of the deal because the seller of the house had actually intentionally created the image of the house as being haunted, which theoretically hurt the property value. But then, interestingly, so the buyer got out of having to buy the house. But then because of the case had gained a lot of publicity, there were ghost hunters ended up paying, or, people that wanted a haunted house for whatever reason, ended up paying more than the buyer was originally trying to buy the house for.
So it was like a all's well that ends well?
Yeah, I think it was a happy ending all around.
Okay. Well, since we have a happy ending, maybe that'll be good time to transition to another topic. I wanted to share my inspiration this week, which is the artist and musician Joanna Wang. Joanna Wang is a Taiwanese American who was brought up in California, but that she has heritage in Taiwan, that her father was a music producer, and that because of that connection, she was able to presumably have like a leg up to starting her music career. And so she had her debut album at 16, Start From Here, released in Taiwan, and essentially became a pop star over there. Even though she had this kind of enviable career as like a celebrity, she kind of rejected the studio and wanted to make her music. Have you had a chance to hear Joanna Wang's music? And
heard maybe one or two songs. I think I've heard one of her kind of more produced pop songs, and then also some of the songs she's posted on YouTube of just kind of her sitting on a bed with a guitar.
What is your impressions of either of those?
A pop musician in so many ways is seen like a product almost. Mm-hmm. But then also to see her as having these kind of intimate video diaries as a human being and a person.
Right.
It's interesting to see that dichotomy.
For sure. And so for people who have never heard her name or heard her music, it's actually even more complicated than that because she, like, her influences are like video game music, and like I feel like the only things kind of close for me are like maybe Neil Cicerega and Lemon Demon, and like They Might Be Giants, which, full disclosure, like that's why I'm interested in talking about her, because like the music that she likes to do, unlike the produced stuff, shall we call it, is the stuff that's like my favorite. Like I can count on like one hand like the types of people that do that kind of eclectic, kind of fun but technically competent, and like it's like a very specific niche, like that it's like kind of sarcastic almost, and there's like elements of like tongue-in-cheek, and you can see why it's like harder sell for like a studio, but the side effect is that it's a very particular brand that is my favorite, right? So like maybe everyone can drink a Coke, but like there's like a particular drink at a particular place that's like your favorite, and even if no one else knew about it, it would still be your favorite. And that's kind of how I kind of think of her music. And so to kind of tell the story a little bit more linearly, I think she started out basically like every character in like a 90s movie. Like, at least for me and you, we're of this generation where we were aware that like musicians kind of had this adversarial relationship with like the suits. Like, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so like there was the idea that, you know, in the grunge era, that it's like you had to be very selective about your label, and like certain labels were going to kind of sell you out and force you into like certain imagery to sell the most, and like music was very, very incidental to that process, like that it was basically an industry, and any sort of artwork was incidental. So she, as a young person, out of obligation to her studio contract, and maybe even to some degree like a familial obligation, she kind of followed the instructions of her studio. So she kind of describes it as being the kind of Kenny G of Taiwan. So that her music was kind of easy listening, beautiful but bland music that could be played in coffee shops. And if you do a little research, you can see that like she did like an AMA on Reddit, where she even is kind of conversant with a quote unquote fan who was saying that they were in Taiwan at the time of like her debut album, and that her album was like literally always playing in the McDonald's in his neighborhood, like 24/7. And he got sick of both. And then she commiserates, saying like she was also sick of it. So, and I want to mention the AMA because it's like this really raw insight into her perspective, whether or not everyone would agree with it from the studio side. It's like she seems to be like fairly like laying it all out there. She's not holding a lot back. But then what's interesting to me is, and sad and poignant, is that you would imagine, you know, there's some people that like what she did over there, and then there's going to be people who don't quite understand her music, but that you would hope that even if they don't understand what she's trying to do, at least like her American audience might be able to be sympathetic, right? But she was like kind of being told that she was like a brat, like you should be so lucky to be like the Britney Spears of Taiwan, or you should be so lucky to have any sort of like opportunity to be a celebrity.
Right.
And they weren't really like giving her the respect or like sympathy that I think anyone should deserve. Because it's like really hard to give up success to do something that is not like financially successful because you love it, right?
Right.
And it reminds me of how, like in art in general, there's this weird thing of we're always given this lip service that art is almost like magical, and that we should like that the artists are these like special creatures, but then it's very easy to kind of throw them under the bus unless there's a financial like opportunity behind their like work to prove that their stuff was good.
Right.
And so I find, you know, you mentioned about like the in the bedroom thing. So like as recently as yesterday on a channel called Alferd Packer, like she releases these like things she records on her computer in her bedroom, and then it's like this artist is like kind of performing for crowds of 10 views when like she could at her choice could easily be like playing like stadiums like in Taiwan. And there's something special about that choice to me, right?
Right. I feel like also as I was saying, you know, it's kind of humanizing to see her playing her guitar in her bedroom, you know, just as a real person. But it does kind of bridge the gap of these, you know, superstars or like big pop stars, rock stars. You know, it's easy to see them as these kind of monolithic, you know, performers, but then really they are just people doing their best.
The opening like music under the intro is from Joanna Wang, and that a side effect of her having this like second career separate from her Taiwanese career is that like she has that accessibility that like I was able to contact her and she gave her permission to use her music. So for anyone ever wondering like who or what that was playing at the beginning and end of these song or shows, it's this artist Joanna Wang. And I was just going to say thanks to her, and then also you should definitely check out her albums, which are on iTunes under Joanna Wang, as well as the Secondary Life, which is that she's had to do out of necessity, right? That like her studio owned her name, so she had to use like a secret identity to have like her to just put music on YouTube, which is something that any kid can do, right? And she uses Alferd Packer, which is like an allusion to a cannibal folk song. Had you ever heard that original song, Alferd Packer?
I had not. I've never heard it.
If it was a movie, it's kind of stranger than fiction, right? Like someone kind of like Gem or something, the idea of being like a pop star and then like you go home and you have this other secret life, like Hannah Montana or something.
Yeah.
For people curious, like it's not just that she does like kind of quirky, funky music, but they often have like a kind of interesting message. So like she has a song called Coins, which is about like capitalism in some way, and then she has a song called Feet, I think, which is about like a tongue-in-cheek kind of reference to like some fans have like a weird fixation on that, and like I'm probably doing a bad job of selling it, but like she has like a very kind of like hip, for lack of a better word, like point of view, and then like the songs themselves are very like upbeat, like poppy, like tone. That's why I think of They Might Be Giants. Like, could you think of anything else like that would describe it?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Okay, yeah. Like you're gonna co-sign on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna co-sign on that.
Okay.
But I was gonna ask, do you have any advice? You told us her channel. Do you have any advice on kind of an intro song that we should check out on Alferd Packer?
I would say that, like, in terms of you know nothing about me and you know nothing about her, a good song to put on, even under her original channel on YouTube, is When I Nod. That's a good one. And there's another one called Truckin' Every Day.
Okay.
Those are like just like easy ones. Throw them on, and like you can kind of get the idea. But then I would even go as far as to say like beyond the singles like that. Like that could be, you could hear them on the radio. She has like a early album called Bernie, The Adventures of Bernie the Schoolboy, which is like a concept album in the style of like a classical symphony. Like it has like this like an opera almost. So like even if those two songs weren't your favorite, like checking out her different albums, they even have like an entirely different vibe, even though it's like her voice. So The Adventures of Bernie the Schoolboy is really good to me, and there's another one called Galaxy Crisis, which I think evokes like 1980s anime theme songs almost.
Okay.
So if that's your cup of tea, like there's like an anthem that like I could picture you put it on and like seeing giant robots blasting off, like just in terms of a mood.
Okay.
So yeah, like I'll admit that like I don't quite understand the trajectory of her career, like whether she's like kind of made up with her studio or like she's still with her label and she's still like producing work. So maybe hopefully she's garnered a little bit more of a negotiation aspect where she proved to them that like I'm not going to do exactly what you say, so like let's collaborate instead of you just dictating what I have to do. But I would say check her out. Both Alfred Packard and Joanna Wang, and you can buy her stuff on iTunes just like any other artist. I think that just leaves the next thing, which is our weekly feature, What I Fixed This Week. Is there anything that you've fixed in the last week, Alex?
Recently had a startling discovery that my power company was coming to turn my lights off because I had not been receiving the bills they were sending me.
Oh man!
And so after a series of phone calls, I managed to figure that out, and I did not get the power turned off. So that one had a happy ending.
That's huge.
What about you, Sean?
We even know how important that is now that how much of like law school is online.
Oh, right.
So it's like that would have been quite a blow. You would have had to live out of the library, right?
Right.
So yeah,
which some people do of their own accord.
Right. So like I had a simple thing, which was that I went to like a charity garage sale kind of thing, and they had a bulletin board that was I want to say like 4 feet by 6 feet or something, and just like huge, barely got it into the car. And I'm going to use it to pin paper and hopefully do like large scale paintings on it.
Cool.
And the reason I just wanted to share it was that like I've never really, up until the like last few months, I never really painted on paper, which seems silly. Why wouldn't you? That's the first thing you do. And I found it difficult because like the paper can wrinkle, and also I guess there's the feeling that it seems like a little nothing, but it's been kind of a little bit of a mini little new chapter in my life is painting on paper for.
Okay. Any upcoming paintings on paper we should look out for?
Yeah, like if you follow me on Instagram, like the last 10 or 15 of them have actually been on paper, and I think like the test has not been like, is it really good? It's like, is it that you wouldn't notice a difference? Like that,
right.
like has been my goal. Alex, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug or mention before we sign off here?
Oh, I think we're good to go. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Do you think you might come back sometime?
We'll see if I've got something to say.
Okay. Thanks, Alex.
Find more information at doubleprimary.com.